Note at the top of the show, June is actually Gun Violence Awareness Month, and we're really happy to have Nicole on to share with us different ways we can get involved. A lot of resources can be found at sandyhookpromise.org, and you can join with us to do our part to reduce and eradicate gun violence.
When a parent has a child die, it doesn't matter whether you own a gun or not. You are on the same journey at that point. At the end of the day, this isn't about me and my feelings. It's about figuring out how we can solve this problem together. And it's too easy to fall into fear and anger, which doesn't really ever bring people together into solutions.
We already know what helps. Connection is the cure. It's our deep and meaningful relationships that give us hope and healing. Welcome to This Helps. I'm Marlon Morgan. Join us as we practice authentic and vulnerable conversations that inspire us to go deeper with the people in our own lives.
We are so excited to have a nationally recognized leader in school safety and gun violence, Nicole Hockley, with us today. She is the co-founder and co-CEO of Sandy Hook Promise, a national nonprofit organization that educates and empowers youth and adults to prevent violence in schools, homes, and communities. She's led the creation of life-saving violence prevention programs that have reached over 23 million youth and adults across the country. Nicole is a sought-after speaker, media commentator, and change maker whose groundbreaking public service campaigns have earned global acclaim. Her unwavering commitment to protecting children and honoring her son's memory continues to inspire a movement of hope, action, and prevention. Nicole joins us today to share her story of turning tragedy into powerful action and hope, and to teach us how we can do our part in preventing school violence.
We are very excited to hear from you about all of what's been happening lately. I think you have a perspective that can help us continue to fight for the common good and for our kids' safety and for all of our safety. Nicole, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Nicole, can we start with life before Sandy Hook and kind of bring us through so that we can talk about the hope and the solutions that you've been creating ever since?
Sure. So before December 14th, 2012, I was the kind of mom you'd probably be standing behind in line at Starbucks and not even notice, just like any other mother, any other person. I moved back to Connecticut in 2011 after living abroad in England for 18 years. And that's where both of my sons were born, in England. And we chose to come back to America and be in Connecticut as a way to, explore all the opportunities that growing up in America can bring you, and also to support Dylan's education, who had recently been diagnosed with autism and didn't really have the right support services where we were. So it was, a very happy life, two fantastic kids, Dylan and Jake. And, just really focusing on getting them settled at the school. We chose Newtown because of the school. Getting my then husband settled into his work. And for me, taking a leave of absence for work. It was going to be just for 2 years. I'd always been in corporate marketing and large organizations for food, for health insurance, for different efforts. And I just wanted to focus on being a mom for a little bit and to get my kids grounded. So, we had a good life, a happy existence, and you just really appreciate those last 2 years that I was very much a full-time parent, being there for my kids every single day. And I had always planned to go back to work. And 2013 was going to be the year that I was going to do that. And I was actually looking to open up kind of a health fitness store in Newtown. It had been choosing locations, combining like my love of kickboxing and jiu-jitsu and healthy eating. And the location that I was about to start renting out ended up being below what would then become the first office for Sandy Hook Promise instead.
Wow.
So
Wow.
certainly did not expect anything like this to happen, and certainly never expected that my life's work and mission would actually be focused on preventing gun violence and keeping kids safe.
Thanks for sharing that with us. Um, you mentioned all these plans and the things that were important to you before this. And I think a lot of us have things in mind that are like our purpose and the way we find meaning in life and the things that we're looking forward to.
Mm.
But like you mentioned, once this sort of unimaginable tragedy happened and your son Dylan was killed, uh, did everything change immediately? And then what? How
Mm.
was that process? How long did it take to kind of know that you wanted to devote your life from then on to promising? I mean, the promise itself. Can you share that with us?
Sure. Well, the promise is it's kind of a poem that was written by an agency that we first worked with, and that I helped read at the launch of the organization 1 month after the shooting. And it's really about listening. It's about accepting different opinions and trying to find ways to come together to find solutions. Recognizing this is a very polarizing and divisive issue. And I wouldn't say that in the values of the promise, those words are still what this organization is guided by, and the values that we hold true in everything that we've done for the last 12 years. But I would say it certainly wasn't. I mean, everything changed immediately. The second, the shooting happened, and knowing that it had happened, and then finding out later that night, my eldest son survived and my youngest son was killed. Um, Life completely fractured at that point, and I would say, the first 2 years probably were very much a fog. I remember, I used to wander around, and as I would walk through the halls of Congress down in DC, I would trail my hands along the walls because I was trying to figure out, was this actually real? Because it's just so unimaginable to think about your 6-year-old son being murdered in his classroom. And it took a long time to fathom, every morning waking up thinking, was this just a dream? Was this a horrible nightmare? But instead you're living the nightmare every day. But I knew what I did know very quickly, was that I am that sort of person. My DNA is such that I have to do something. And I know everyone deals with grief and tragedy and trauma in very different ways. It's a very individual and unique journey. My person, who I am, I have to do something. I have to use my voice. I have to speak up, and I have to make change. So when community members from Sandy Hook were coming together and said, here's a platform for any family to use to advocate for the changes that they want to see, I was one of the very first people to say, yeah, I want that. So I helped launch it, and then began my education on gun violence, on school safety, on mental health and wellness, on all the root causes and all the potential solutions and the politics of this movement as well. And then built out the strategy of, again, using the promise as our guiding principles and value, which is something I truly believe and we embody every single day. But using that to work on the strategy of how do you bring people together to create positive change. So that's kind of been my journey, but it's still a journey. I'm still learning. I'm still adapting. I'm still grieving. When you really get down to it, that doesn't end. It's just channeling your love into something, into action.
Yeah, I think as a therapist, what keeps coming to mind are the 5 stages of grief, and I can almost see and hear those coming through with the different things. I mean, there's sort of the denial, the bargaining, the anger, the sometimes acceptance. Those
Mm.
the depression. It sounds like this was sort of a resetting of your entire life as much as having a child is a resetting, and then losing a child, it sounds like it was another complete change and reset.
Mhm.
And it took you, it sounds like, all but, a month to realize you wanted to do something. And then maybe a year to 2 years before it started to become really clear.
Yeah, I would say that's a fair assessment, and it just continues to adapt around that. And that cycle of grief, you can be in all 5 stages at the exact same time,
Yeah,
and
talk
you
about
bounce all
confusion
over the
as the main
place.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Mm.
that's that's so true. But
Yeah.
as the mission became clear, as the strategy became clear, the purpose was always the same, but the how has been changed and adapted over time. But it's working. So,
Yeah, speaking of that, it's working, and a lot of the things that you've had quite a few, I'm sure, low points that we don't always hear about, but also
mhm.
fairly big victories that just simply, I can't imagine they would have happened unless you made this decision. When it comes to policy and even politics, what can you share with us some of the high points of putting your purpose and meaning and energy towards this?
Yeah, well, on the policy side, on legislation, we've had a lot of success at both the state and federal level on passing laws that help, like the Save Students Act, which we wrote and passed in several states already, and it's on the docket for 3 or 4 more states right now, which provides mandated training in violence prevention and suicide prevention for schools across the country. We also helped, because we're nonpartisan, very strictly nonpartisan, we've worked, with the Obama administration, the first Trump administration, the Biden administration, and passed federal laws with each of those, such as, lobbying for the Mental Health Reform Act as part of the 21st Century Cures Act under President Obama, passing the Stop School Violence Act, which we wrote under President Trump, that's provided hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funds to schools across the country, and the Stand Up Act under President Biden for suicide prevention training, as well as our role in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. So there's been a lot of success there, and programmatically, in the number of schools that we've trained, the number of school shootings, credible school shootings that we've averted, which is now currently 13 that meet our strict data definition. 18 that meet our strict data definition, and over 700 young lives that were imminent suicide attempts. So we're really proud of the work that we do, but yeah, there have been a lot of low points along the way in terms of failures or perceived failures, or just navigating um, this issue, and also continuing to scale and grow this organization while navigating life, as well, which
Yeah.
you never know what's coming around the corner with that.
Yeah, I think we're sort of, continually reminded of that in this information age. And,
Mm,
um, you know, it is hopeful to hear about some of these victories, bringing us forward and making us safer, making our kids safer, preventing suicide, which is also, has been on the rise for quite a number of years now,
mm,
especially with their younger folks. You know, when I've heard you, what's interesting, and whenever I've heard you talk about being, nonpartisan,
mhm,
there's such a lesson there for all of us. And you've been so inspirational. Anytime I've heard you talk about it, I don't ever hear you say one side or the other is an enemy. I only ever hear you say that suicide should be prevented, that violence needs to be prevented. and people need to be safer. The enemy is the senseless violence. It's not one side or the other. And you've even
Mm.
gone further and said, and we're honest about, and I think this was important for people to understand, that sometimes people didn't vote for some of the legislation that you just mentioned, and they honestly said, "Hey, I'm looking to protect my job. I'm being, I want to get reelected, and so I'm willing to, you know, do whatever that takes, even if it's
Yeah.
something that is difficult."
Politics are interesting, and politicians are interesting people.
Mm.
I've met a lot of amazing, um, from all political ideologies. I've met amazing champions um, who are very honest about what they will stand for and support and what they won't. And I like hearing their reasoning as to why they won't support something, for example, because that also helps me to understand, okay, what are they experiencing in their constituency that perhaps I need to think about more. Because this is not, you can't be one-sided in this approach. But as I always say, nobody is pro gun violence. Nobody is pro youth violence or pro suicide. We all agree on that. We just don't always agree on how we should be preventing them. And that's where, respectful discourse and discussion and listening are so critically important. And that's why we have stayed so strictly nonpartisan, and strictly not anti-gun as well. I mean, the vast majority of people that are affected by gun violence are gun owners.
Mm.
So they need to be part of this movement and discussion as well.
Yeah, including people who value gun ownership and see it as something that makes their life better, I guess. Yeah.
It's how you define safety, and people
Mm.
define it in different ways. But 2/3 of death by firearm are suicides, and that's
Mm.
usually the gun owner themselves. So this has to be an inclusive way to work through this rather than shaming or othering people for their choices. We
Wow.
don't always have to have the same choices, but understanding each other's perspective and what it means to be safe and how we execute that for our families. That's not something to argue about, really.
It's so much easier to argue and be upset, Nicole, than it is
Oh yeah.
to just you know admit things or kind of come to a common ground. What is that about us as human beings? It's like um we put rightness over relationships so often.
Mm.
And how is it that you're not doing that? How do you avoid that?
Well, let's be honest. I get really angry,
Mm.
and I get, and it's taken me a while because I have never chosen to own a gun. That's not how I define safety for myself and my family. But I also recognize that my choice doesn't have to be the choice of everyone else. And when a parent has a child die, it doesn't matter whether you own a gun or not. You are on the same journey at that point. So I guess it's just maybe my growing age or sense of maturity, or just at the end of the day, this isn't about me and my feelings. It's about figuring out how we can solve this problem together. And it's too easy to fall into fear and anger. Which doesn't really ever bring people together into solutions.
Have you ever talked to a parent who had, arguably the worst thing that could happen is losing a child, but have you ever talked to another parent who's lost a child who believed one way about guns and was sort of pro gun, and then
Yeah.
that changed them and, changed their
Um,
perspective?
I don't know if it necessarily changed them. I've spoken to, there's at least one Sandy Hook family that I know of. We don't have a relationship, that, whose child was killed, who are very pro gun rights. There are families in other places, Parkland, et cetera, who
Mm.
are proud gun owners and proud 2A supporters who have spoken out about it not being about the gun, about it just being about mental health,
Mm.
which is false.
Yeah. Well, I
It,
want to talk about that because
yeah,
we need to talk about the mental health connection and if there is
yeah,
one. And but
yeah.
so you haven't seen people,
I don't think I've seen them change their opinions so much, but I think I've seen openness to discussion. But that's again where sometimes all it's the disagreement on the how something could be implemented, how each jurisdiction or district is different, that sometimes becomes more of the rub versus the perception that, oh, well, just because I don't own guns and my child was killed, therefore I must be saying we need to get rid of all the guns. There are some parents who are like that. There are some parents who said my child was killed, therefore I need more guns to protect my family from this happening again. I
Mhm.
need to create prisons out of schools into prisons to keep security and safety. So there's different approaches, and I guess it's just important to stay an open mind that not one solution is necessarily going to be all right or all wrong. It's the mixture of it, and it's a more nuanced conversation.
Whenever I try to put myself in this situation, and if I'm being honest, even this morning, knowing that I was gonna have this conversation with you and learn from you, um, I was sad. It's spring break. Both my boys are home,
Mhm.
and I gave them an extra hug and a kiss, and I can't imagine the loss that you've experienced. But I also want to say, I, I think that if that happened, even if I was like sort of my opinion about guns was like pro gun, that kind of loss, I can't imagine it being like I want everything. I want all of the things. Like no possible way that that could happen again. I don't know, like guns shouldn't exist is how I would think um
and
I
and
would
there's nothing
react.
wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's and that's an honest response. I don't know. It's just, I guess I'm so focused on solutions. And I remember, the first, because everyone starts off looking at this issue when they get involved in this issue, or any sort of activism around this or advocacy, just focusing on policy. And I remember, that first year, I'd never even been to DC before and spent a lot of time lobbying for background checks, um, which wouldn't have necessarily been something that would have stopped Sandy Hook, but was seen as the low hanging fruit and something that we could do. And when that failed, just 4 months after the shooting, um, that hit me hard, because I felt, not only had I failed to protect my son by sending him to school that day, but I'd also failed to be able to do anything about it or to help someone else. And it's easy to say like that could have been a moment that I stepped away or a moment that I started fighting more for like traditional gun control or something like that. But I was like, okay, maybe it's the business person in me that I'm like, all right, can't solve it that way. Let's rethink back around and figure out a different way in.
I think I would have
Um,
blamed everyone else. Like they failed. They failed to come to their
well,
senses.
yeah, it was, as President Obama said, it was a shameful day in Congress. But blame, I don't know. I could spiral into anger and blame, or I could channel my energy into something more constructive.
Well, thank you for continuing. It's obvious that that wasn't the final say, and that first loss wasn't going to be constantly repeated. You've
Yeah,
continued to make our culture better. I think bringing together both sides of the aisle, and even I don't even know that the words I'm using to describe last year's politics are even going to make sense in this coming year.
Yeah.
But if you break it down to the human experience and you say that, everybody has a place and an opinion and a background and things that make them feel safe and define safety differently, that's all a huge lesson, I think, that we could hopefully take with us in our daily conversations.
I hope so, because I think if we sometimes it's just the basic decency and respect that is getting in the way of some positive conversations. But it's a very tricky landscape right now, and I'm not like Pollyannaing this entire thing. These are very difficult times, and there's a lot of sense of actually stirring up the pot more in terms of fear and anger,
Sure.
versus trying to come together.
Well, I
So
think people who are scared are a lot easier to control. I think, just objectively speaking.
yeah, that's probably very, very true.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Parkland, for example, and I know,
Mm.
Hannah, I think what you were, how old were you um, when that happened?
I would have been 17.
So you were a senior in high school?
Yes, I was a senior in high school. I was just reflecting about that earlier today. And even though I knew about some of the previous shootings, I think that was the one where I was just old enough to really understand it and
Mm.
experience that and feel scared, really scared. And yeah, my school was one of the several that was part of the national walkout afterward and really pushing for early voter registration and mental health resources and all of that. Yeah, but I was kind of putting myself back in those shoes earlier this morning and feeling all of that again.
Mm.
And Nicole, I think it'd be harder for me. I keep the only thing I can do during this conversation when is empathize, I think, and try to anyway. And I keep trying to draw a parallel for how you have taken this versus how most people would. And in previous conversations, and I've heard you talk about continuing to grieve, I've heard you talk about experiencing PTSD. Um, but this whole time, it seems like you have not, or like you've refused to
Mm.
go in the direction of devaluing people, of labeling them, of
Mm.
othering them. And where's that coming from? What is there a spiritual thing that we need to know about, or that we could,
No, no, I I don't know other than I want to win. I want this to work. I want I want school shootings to stop. I want youth violence to stop. And if all I did was fight, I would not only burn out and destroy myself, but I don't think I'd win anything. I don't think you get to the goal by just fighting. You have this in this particular issue. It's about bringing people with you. And I
mm,
don't want to just keep hitting my head against a brick wall. And I don't want to be consumed by anger. And I don't want to role model that for my surviving child. I want to win. And for me, that means being inclusive, understanding, bringing people along rather than not winning and just continuing to fight till the day I die.
that is just so different than what we are seeing defined as a win right now. We know when it comes to even in culture with the fame equals value sort of thing, or the money.
Mm.
I just saw the most recent, you know, top 100 billionaires list on Forbes, and it's like 15 pages actually, and it goes way past 100. And we see all this money and power amassed, and I think there's still something in us as human beings or a society. Maybe it's an American thing. I really don't. I'm not cultured enough to tell you.
Mm.
Um, but we see a lot of us are fed the idea that winning somebody else loses.
Why can't we all win? I mean, and this
Mm.
isn't even about this is about the kids winning. This is about a generation being able to grow up and be safe and for families to be whole. I don't if this if we don't win on this, then we all lose. So I think, you know, I don't know how else to describe it, but this is who I am and this is the way I do things. It doesn't mean to say that I don't mess up along the way. I sure as heck do. And sometimes it's really hard to keep my mouth shut because I'm very conscious that anything I say or do that goes against the promise or our values could hurt the organization and could therefore hurt our chances to continue to bring people in. You know, I have strong opinions, I have strong beliefs, but I also believe that um, a, this is the way to make change. This is the way to create social and behavioral and cultural change in the long term. And I'm going to stay that course and not divert.
In therapy, there's this therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. Are you familiar with that?
No, no.
It's one of my favorite theoretical orientations because it sort of invites us to first accept pain as a part of life
Mm,
and actually use it as a message to be part of what helps us form our values and our opinions, and what we
mm,
think we want to do in life and where we get meaning. And the broader lesson of what I want people to hear from you, because it's what I've learned from you over the years of hearing you talk and watching sort of the changes that you've made, that it's the broader lesson is that you have looked inside, found out what you value, and f- not allowed anyone to sort of knock you off that path by, putting out an upsetting uh, piece of content or getting you to react in a certain way. But you have essentially um, defined the higher calling, or the thing that's bigger than yourself, that you are fighting for. And the second part of that, after identifying and having that insight, which I imagine sometimes even tragedy can make us really look inside, and you can't ignore it in some ways. But then there's that whole idea of the relationships and the people you do share that with and the people you have around you.
mm.
How has that supported you and kept you going? Are there certain relationships that you can call people and they, on one of those days where you're feeling mad or, disappointed? What's that like? Because that's the
Yeah.
second part.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty tight circle that
Mhm.
I have around me that I know are my go-to people, and that I'm their go-to people. Like one of those people is Mark Barden,
Mhm.
whose son Daniel was killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School. He is my co-founder and co-CEO. We bring different skill sets to the organization. He's the guy everybody loves and everyone has a fantastic relationship with. I'm more like the business introvert, in an extrovert's
Mhm.
job. But he and I can literally say anything to each other.
Mhm.
And sometimes when we need to vent or express emotions, we're just like a brother and sister, and close friends. And I can say anything to him, and I know he understands because of the same frustrations, the same, you know, um, controls of the way we run this organization are for him and same as me. Same as, some of the people I work with. I work with the most passionate and committed people, who I'm just always so proud of. And also, I have got a circle of friends here, some who knew Dylan, some who didn't, but understand, who I am at my core and are there for me, for whatever. And same with my son, Jake, my
Mhm.
20-year-old now. Um,
How's he doing? What's he up to?
he's a junior at UConn right now, and he is, he's my living heart. I think sometimes in the past he might have thought that work was the priority. I think he's finally starting to realize that he is my number one priority. He is my joy, my happiness. He is my everything. And a lot of this work is for his future. And he's a good kid, but he's starting to also recognize, because he was at the school that day, and I think he's starting to recognize over time that him thinking, oh, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. There are things that turn up in unexpected ways
Mhm.
that is actually unresolved trauma or reaction or forms perhaps of PTSD from that day that he's just now starting to think, oh, maybe that does have something to do with what happened to me when I was 8. So it's an interesting journey for him, but he's a good kid.
When you learn about the world and, at that young age, I think so many of us, that's all you have to compare it to is what happened to you. You don't have these other perspectives, and so you don't always know what has traumatized you or
Um,
shaped your thoughts and beliefs around certain things. Can can you talk a little bit about the students and siblings who survive, and go on to live life after this? What does that look like for them?
it's so different, and there's not like my son is, he's doing his own thing. He's really interested in Sandy Hook Promise and wants to be part of it, but his love is fitness and nutrition, so he's trying to figure that out. Mark Barden's kids, his daughter, their middle child, has, was involved in activism for a while, and now she's doing her own thing, but steps back in every once in a while. So it's all very it's all very different in terms of what they do. I know that there's another group that came out of Newtown as well that has a lot of some of the students who were there that day, survived that day. They should all be, Dylan would be starting his college years if college was on his pathway. Some of them have stepped into activism, and then step out as they need to. So again, it's very different experiences. And like they used to have to give training to kids as they were coming from growing up and applying to things like colleges, because you suddenly leave Newtown where, while everyone is different, at least there is knowledge and awareness of what happened. You go out in the world and there'll be kids who sometimes are like, I don't know what to say when someone says, where are you from? Um, because the reaction can be immediate. I mean, it's kind of a running joke that I'm, the worst person you want to bring to a dinner party, because, people just start crying in front of me, or it's incredibly awkward, which has made me even more socially awkward. But, so these kids have that to contend with as well. Everyone has heard of Sandy Hook.
It's one tragedy just defining,
Yeah.
predefining.
Predefining. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that's hard. How do you create your own identity when it's tied to such an awful event?
Hmm. Have you noticed when it comes to different generations, specifically the younger ones, have you noticed a shift or drive or, more interest in this work?
Well, I think overall, I mean, since Sandy Hook, I mean, this is pretty much the lockdown and the school shooting generation. I mean, obviously there were school shootings beforehand, Columbine, Virginia Tech, this is not new. However, there was something about Sandy Hook, perhaps it was that they were 6 and 7-year-old kids, that was different, which I think from just looking at school shootings, not even talking about all of the other daily violence and the communities that are impacted by gun violence every single day. But from a school shooting perspective, this reignited a movement of gun violence prevention. And I think that the kids since then, they've been practicing active shooter drills for years now. It really started that up again. And I think this is where that gives me a lot of hope, is that, and why we do what we do at Sandy Hook Promise with giving these knowledge, skills, and practice to kids, is this element of safety has kind of been ripped away from this generation, to think that, school should be a place of safety, of community, of learning, but to think, well, actually, we're going to have a practice now for what happens if an active shooter comes to our school. And how do you give the control back to those kids? So I'm always inspired by the students that I see around the country and their activism. When you give them the chance to authentically use their voice in this movement, they seize it and they make things happen, because this has been done to them, but they are a significant part of the solution to make the change happen for the future.
Parents and educators often have strong feelings about active shooter drills, and myself included. And whenever I hear that there's going to be one at my son's school, I'm like, stunned with like, is this, there's nothing worse than an actual shooting happening, but it hasn't yet. And then is this like traumatizing in and of itself? What do you
Yeah.
tell parents and educators about that?
I think that I can understand the concept of active shooter drills and why practicing what to do in the event of something awful like that is important. However, I don't think that this is it, it's a completely unregulated industry. There's not a lot of sharing of best practice guidelines, or how to do this in developmentally appropriate ways. How do you do this for children with special needs? How do you do this for children in wheelchairs, for example? There's not a lot of thought on that. And I think about that a lot because Dylan was autistic.
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell my 6-year-old autistic child to be completely silent and hide somewhere. That's just not going to happen. So I think we need to think about, what is this doing? And should we be training kids in active shooter drills at all? Or should it be more appropriate training for the adults around them, for if this is going to happen, this is how we look after our kids? And I also think there needs to be better regulations. We did write some model legislation on how active shooter drills should be done, and we passed it in Indiana and Minnesota, I think. So there is an appetite there for best practice, because you can hear some horrific stories from this, for like some for-profit organizations will do simulations where they're
I've
shooting.
seen that.
Exactly. And it's like, who in their right mind thinks that that's a good idea? I'm sorry, or the students or the faculty don't know that it's a drill. I mean, that's terrifying. That I don't know.
Sounds like terrorism.
It does, and I don't know why anyone would do that. Those practices need to be stopped, for sure. And think about, what are we actually trying to teach the child here, and how can it be done in a way that is appropriate, but also, again, giving them back control. One of the things I learned from a school in Oklahoma, which has helped generate the idea of having student clubs, they were taught, these kids at this school were talking about, how they redo the lessons of our Say Something program after every active shooter drill. And I said, well, why do you do that? And they said, well, because we'd rather practice how to prevent a shooting than practice for when it happens. And I was like, that makes sense to me.
Hmm.
So that's more, prevention and preparedness can work together, but you have to do it in a trauma informed way.
So, for parents and educators, how can they ensure that their school is sort of doing it in a trauma informed way and not unnecessarily upsetting and traumatizing everyone?
I mean, I would definitely say bring in some practitioners who know about
Hmm.
trauma informed approaches. Simulations are never going to be trauma informed.
It
Uh,
almost you're almost talking about common sense in some way. Like,
it,
as a
it
therapist,
is,
I'm
but
like, I don't think I need schooling
I I
to
would
know
think
this.
not, but there
Yeah.
there are schools that do it. So I don't know where that common sense is, or like are they putting themselves in the shoes of the kids there? Like, how would this feel? How would this be? Or even like we work a lot with the schools in terms of um like, how do you, if you have an SRO, a school security officer,
Mhm.
are you using that for external threats and to build relationships with kids, or are you using it for punitive measures for kids within the school?
What do you
That
find
that
that
latter, I mean, it's a mixed bag, but for schools that use it as the latter, it's like that's probably not the best way to build a trusted relationship with the students. And we shouldn't always be working just on punitive measures or expulsions for kids that might be um, acting up or having warning signs of potential violence, because it's we have from a trauma informed lens, it's less about saying what's wrong with you to more like what happened to you, and
Mhm.
understanding that these are, I mean, you're a therapist, these are acts from trauma. They come from somewhere, and understanding what happened to a child can be much more helpful than punishing them or pushing them out. We need to practice bringing more in and creating safety nets versus pushing out and continuing a feeling of rejection, there's it's really resetting that mindset around how to approach issues that are actually probably based in trauma or come from trauma versus someone just acting out. No one just becomes a school shooter.
Right.
It's a pathway, and there's a lot of reasons for opportunities for intervention there.
So you mentioned signs of potential violence or ways to kind of detect when there's a problem. I also know that you have worked hard to create um, systems that can alert people to that, or
Mhm.
can you tell us what parents and educators and even other students can be looking for, and then if they see or hear something, uh, what how can they report it?
Yeah. So the potential, I mean, there's a lot of resources on our website as well, sandyhookpromise.org, and we're also very careful in where we're talking about warning signs, that some of these can be very, very overt, such as posting on social media, I am going to shoot up a school, which we do see. But it can also, that spectrum of violence is so wide, and it could also look like someone um, being permanently isolated or rejected or bullied or being a bully or creating other acts of violence or self-harm. Most mass shooters are also suicidal.
Hmm.
Not all people who ideate on suicide become mass shooters, but the reverse is very much true. So thinking about, someone who's giving away possessions, someone who doesn't know how to manage their anger in a healthy way or resolve conflicts or lacks empathy. These are all things that we teach someone who's at the basis level. It's about having connection. So that's why we talk a lot in our schools about like our trusted adult program, and teaching teachers and educators how to do this, because there's so much evidence that shows if a child just has even just one trusted adult connection that they can go to, they're going to make different choices. So those healthy connections are incredibly important. Where there isn't a trusted adult, then we have things like our anonymous reporting system, where a child can use our app or telephone hotline or website to report, this is what I'm hearing, this is what I'm seeing, this is concerning behavior. My friend is saying they're going to do this. And that system is the one that has led to, the 18 averted school shootings and the 700 youth suicides averted and close to 4,000 mental health interventions, because that's a way. We always say first, go to a trusted adult. But if you don't feel you can, or you don't have one in your life, use an anonymous reporting system to report your threat so that someone can take action and get that intervention.
There's a sort of movement underway, I think, in the mental health community where it's paradoxical in that we all, for the most part, believe that therapy, mental health, cognitive behavior therapy, just simply having that relationship where hope and healing can take place is really helpful. But there's also this medical model. There's also money involved. There's insurance companies involved. And so there's this whole system or machine that, frankly, I think thinks they have to medicalize it, mental
Yeah.
health issues. My question is, and it's a leading question because it's going to be obvious where I stand. How much of the anxious generation or the
Mm.
rise in depression is due to a toxic culture
Oh,
of
yeah,
isolation and
100% agree with
yeah,
you. Yeah, this epidemic of loneliness and isolation that we have, that was just exacerbated by COVID, but yet continues, has created this um, this flood of mental health issues that it's going to be around for decades now. And we need more funding, we need more resources, but we also need to recognize that it's not always about a diagnosable mental illness. It's loneliness is harmful physically and mentally, just
right.
by itself, and can lead to self-harm or violence if it's not intervened on. So I think this is, this culture of um, unhealthy masculinity doesn't help. This culture of thinking that on social media we have thousands of friends and our life has to be picture perfect. That doesn't help. The pressure it puts on young people, the stigma that we still have around asking for help and reaching out when we need it, that doesn't help. And just this overending feeling of this, like I said, this epidemic of loneliness, whereas people don't, and we teach this to the kids we train, that, the most popular kid in school can still feel lonely and isolated. You can be in a room surrounded with friends and still feel lonely.
That's so true, and it's kind of like friends doesn't mean the same thing to us that it
Yeah.
means now. I've been on this, you know, alternative other mission to redefine words like friends into maybe like companion or
Mm,
something. We're constantly looking to redefine it because I think Facebook sort of co-opted and took away that word a long time
yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
There's another quote that Emil Durkheim, the sociologist, I think he was like from the 1800s or something, but he has all these great quotes. And it was something like, "We're moral beings to the extent we're social beings." And
Mm,
I often think about that quote when it comes to school violence and how isolated and angry and hopeless people get. It's like the further they get away or from the group, the more desperate and the more violence looks like a good option. Is there some truth to that?
I'd say that's totally true. That lack of connection or rejection or marginalization or isolation is very often at the root cause of a lot of this. And you combine that with other traumas or experiences or exposure to violence, and then put in access to a weapon, you definitely have a ticking time bomb on that one.
If you could paint a picture for us, this is almost like also in therapy, the miracle question. If you woke up and the world was like you wanted it to be.
Hmm. Now, how much of this am I allowed to say? That's the question. um,
Yeah.
I I don't think it's unrealistic to envision a world where there is no such thing as a school shooting. I don't think it's unrealistic to envision a world where kids know how to look after each other and can be upstanders to help their peer group when they need help. Um, I don't think it's unrealistic to envision a world where adults can do the exact same thing, and role model that for their kids. I don't think it's necessarily going to happen tomorrow,
Mhm.
but I think it is possible that we can get back to being decent, being supportive, talking rather than just flipping through a phone screen all the time,
Distracting ourselves and further isolating. I
and
feel
further isolating. Yeah,
I feel like so many people today don't understand that they don't have to just be a collection of reactions to content that other
yeah,
people make.
100% agree. 100%. That's going to be tricky to get there, but I do believe it's possible. And as you know, the pendulum's always swinging, and I
Yeah.
think we're at one end of it right now. So it just needs to start coming back.
What have we or can we learn from other countries?
Oh, I mean, the issue of youth violence, unhealthy masculinity, that is a global problem right now. And loneliness and isolation is a global problem because social media, while the channels may differ by country, um, social media has no international walls. So that is truly a global issue. I think where we can learn from other countries is different approaches to it. There's different countries that fund and support mental health and wellness in different ways and prioritize that. Um, Obviously, I mean, I'm watching right now. I think it's this week. Australia's ban on social media
Mm.
is going into effect. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that is implemented,
Mhm.
and what happens as a result. And I'm hoping that social media companies, because they could be there, there's a lot of opportunity for tech for good,
Mhm.
um, and if you take the profit element away a little bit
Mhm.
and focus on what is an appropriate flag, how do we help people versus allowing toxic content to continue. There's an opportunity there, I think, for social media companies to make a change. So I'm interested to see like what happens in Australia and what can we learn from
What
that.
how's Australia why is Australia so seems like they're
I
ahead of
know.
us a lot of times. And it's funny because I don't know if this is just a stereotype and maybe because I watched Crocodile Dundee too many times as a kid, but that was like the most toxic masculinity.
That's so
I'm
true.
like,
That's
what? What?
that's very true, and it's funny. My grandmother was born in Australia and emigrated to the U.S. in I think in the early 40s. And there's technically I think I could go for Australian citizenship. And when I have bad days, I'm like, maybe I should. But there's it's a beautiful culture down there, by the way. But I don't know how, but they just make a decision and they're like, we're going to do this, and they do it. So very interesting, different government, different people, different culture, different
But also like
laws. But
totally man like I think the last person in my most toxic masculine space, the last person I would want to fight is like an Australian person. I don't
oh
know. It
yeah, I
seems
mean
like they would just
look at
beat
their
me up. I don't
sports, Aussie
yeah.
rules, their rugby. I mean, it's vicious.
It's
But
cool. It's like they don't have to have a gun. It's like it kind of puts us to shame. I wish more people would like in fact, yeah, like so when talked
mm,
about acceptance and commitment therapy earlier, but one of the kind of foremost, experts on that is Joseph Cherokee. He's from, I think, New Jersey, but he's lived in Australia for like 25 years.
Mm,
And when he was helping us develop, it's called, and actually it's a free resource that kids have access to, parents, kids, and educators all have access to. It's Wellness Ed Labs or Wellness Education Lab. And it's all based on that type of therapy. But over a year or so, I had to keep asking him to please, when we were creating that resource, stop. He part of it
mm,
is like mentioning like evolution and how we stayed alive and just wanted to not get killed. And he would put words in there like, we want to be social, and we have a negative bias, we avoid pain, and it's all to like not get eaten by a lion or killed. And I kept having to say, Joseph, can you please, this is America. Like, I'm not trying to remind kids about the idea of getting killed all the time. And he's like,
mm.
Marlon, I got to be honest with you. That's really more of an American thing.
It is. It is absolutely an
That took
American
my
thing.
breath away. I was like, "D- how is it just, how is a country like that um s-
Mm,
he sort of explained to me quickly the history of like there was a mass shooting like a long time
yeah.
ago there, and then everyone just came around and said, we need to take your guns, we don't want this to happen again, and it just
Yeah.
happened.
It happened. They don't have a Second Amendment there. So it's more complicated here. But then you look at like there are, is it Switzerland in Europe that has one of the highest per capita elements of gun ownership as a country?
Uh-huh.
You don't hear about gun violence there because their approach towards responsibility, training before you can purchase a gun, and the need for secure storage is so high, like on a military base kind of thing. There's a different ethos around what it means to own a gun and how you practice that, which does not exist in America. Um,
Is this just like a horrible combination of like modern futurism slash social media, internet, and then like cowboy culture? I don't. What is this?
and it's funny because cowboy culture, I mean, is not a bad thing.
I mean, it's obviously cool in some ways because like
It is, and
it
it's
makes a cool
still,
movie. Yeah,
it's also, there's a sense of entrepreneurism with
totally.
cowboy culture
Yeah.
and getting things done and fighting for the future. This is like a twisted cowboy culture we're in right now, where it's more militant and it's more militant wannabes. It's a different. I don't know if maybe because maybe maybe in America, we're our own worst enemy because we value freedom and individuality so much that there can't be a collective restraint like there is in Switzerland or Australia, because that goes against that element and how someone might define freedom,
Well,
which is
freedom,
just more
from
tricky here.
getting killed too is a thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would believe that.
yeah. I appreciate. You know what I do? Guilty pleasure. You have let me still hold on to one of my favorite movies, which is Tombstone. And rest in peace, Val Kilmer. He just passed.
Yes.
Probably the greatest character in movie role,
Mm,
of that time in the '90s. I think. I think the reason though I liked it is because it made so much more sense. Like if you're in a saloon and everyone's drinking whiskey for water, and that's like I think about,
yeah.
and this is not to get political. You don't need to make a comment on this, but my in the debate, when Mitt Romney went up against Obama in those debates originally, and I think Obama lost the first one. It was like he hadn't been challenged in a while, and he kind of did like a crappy job, said. And then the next one, uh, Mitt Romney kept talking about military spending and how we needed more weapons, more guns, more everything. And Obama just classically was like, "Yeah, Mitt, we're not fighting with horses and bayonets anymore." And it was just like
Yeah.
I feel like that won that won the presidency for him because it was like, oh, that's right. We're not. This isn't Tombstone, Arizona. Uh,
Yeah.
so. yeah, it seems like a bad combo. uh, have the information age and then all of these deadly weapons around. So I'm not sure humans are really meant for it. I even understand the Second Amendment. That
Hmm.
makes a ton of sense. What for what year? For what decade? Right? Or I'm sorry,
Yeah.
century.
Yeah. It's a tricky one for sure. And I don't understand, there's a lot of hypocrisy going on right now in terms of what elements of the Constitution, yeah, that can change. We can amend that, but we can't talk about other parts. So, or update them or modernize them in any way, shape, or form. That's a frustration for sure.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to make too much light of it, although I am going through bits in my mind of like Ben Franklin using those tiny glasses to like look at his iPhone and like what that would be like. Would he be a conspiracy theorist, or would he just be still like super smart and going against the grain?
Mm,
Anyway, Nicole, thank you for allowing us to hear from you, to learn from you, and thank you for each day. It would have to be a daily commitment that you're making to honor the memory of your son, the other students and adults who passed, and who continue to be affected by this really senseless and very upsetting violence. Um, I
mm,
can't appreciate you and your work anymore, and even the delineation you always seem to make between mental health and violence. I think that's really important too, as you don't see people with mental health issues um, other than feeling suicidal. I think
correct. Yeah.
is that yeah
Yeah.
create these violent situations.
Hmm.
Just to wrap and leave on a more hopeful note, are there any moments or stories that you would feel comfortable sharing that give you hope or you feel particularly proud of?
Oh man. I mean, there are so many around, like the stories of obviously the acts that we've prevented, and speaking to the kids in particular around that. But I continue to have hope because I know that change is possible. I know that, every time we pass legislation or have another conversation or bring someone in, or you can almost see light bulbs go off over people's heads sometimes. That gives me hope to know that we're on the right path, and that, positive change is possible. So I just keep listening to the young people. I love nothing more than when I go to schools or our youth summit and just listen to them, because they inspire and energize me every single day. That's what really gives me a lot of hope.
Well, I think all of our listeners are going to be inspired and energized. And Nicole, one more time, just so if they want to take a step towards getting involved, towards supporting Sandy Hook Promise and everything that you're doing, how can they do that?
You can quite easily go to our website, sandyhookpromise.org. There are tons of ways to get involved, whether you want to advocate for laws, whether you want to bring programs to your school district, or whether you just want to have a conversation with a child in your life about what's going on, how to navigate social media, how to recognize warning signs, and how to be a trusted adult.
Thank you so much. And look forward to having you back on and staying in touch.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Welcome to Marlon Helps, or at least tries, our Q&A segment. We are joined by producer Andrea. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and we would love to hear if you have any questions you want Marlon to answer or hear our insight on as well. Send them our way on Instagram at This Helps Podcast. And without further ado, let's jump into the question.
Let's do it. Also, just to prep everyone, remind them, please, that I have no idea what question you're going to ask.
Correct.
So the cool thing about this segment is that it might totally suck, and that's probably going to be more interesting.
It's the element of surprise here. All right. So we just talked with Nicole Hockley, and I'd love to know, how do you approach having difficult conversations with your kids?
Mm. A couple rules that I'll make up right now, and that is one, don't make it about you. Don't make it about me. It's so easy to be like, well, I know this, and here's how, and I went through this, and you need to do this. And I think the main strategy that works the best is to have genuine interest and show that you're genuinely interested. That is shown by listening and not trying to problem solve. So if your kid says something that shocks you or scares you, you can be shocked and scared, but do it with another adult later. Just be cool, try to relax. You can say that, you can remind them how much you love them and care about them. And then just ask like general open ended questions, just like you'd want someone to do with you. Because a lot of times
Mhm.
when you're explaining something difficult to a kid, it's like part of it is helping them process through what they might
Right.
think about it, depending on how old they are. So you want to give them some room to develop their own, autonomy from you, but still you want to be like, and you can be honest, like I have an opinion here, but let's um let's talk about how you feel about it right now. And often I'm the one who learns something
Mhm. Mhm.
because my I don't know anything about what it's like to be 11 years old in 2025.
Mhm.
Just be there.
That's good. I don't have kids, and so I have thought about these questions of like, what is it going to be like to have to
Yeah.
like talk with my kids about certain things, and like there's things that I hope for, but as someone who was a kid, I think the biggest thing is trust.
Mhm.
What do you mean?
Trust with the person who's having the conversation with you. No matter what the topic is, I think that if that exists, it all feels safe.
So parents' job is to make it feel safe, to create that safe environment that, so kids can actually explore how they might think or feel.
I'm trying to decide if that feels generational to me. Like, I don't
Mm,
remember, for our listeners, I'm closer to Marlon's age than Hannah's, and I don't remember ever feeling like the parents of like my parents or my friends' parents were really concerned with building trust with their kids.
mm.
And I think that's great that that's already in the forefront of your mind. Yeah.
Do you think that has anything to do with being from New Jersey?
That was the second thing I was gonna say, and then I thought, "Let me not just find any reason to bring that up," but I think that might also be an East Coast thing.
People are going to be
Mm.
getting used to it. I'd be surprised now that producer Andrea is going to join us for the Marlon Helps segment if you don't hear about New Jersey or Philly in at least, one out of every two episodes. I'd be surprised.
I was gonna try to keep it to myself, but I do wonder, growing up in the '90s on the East Coast, how much of that is what the difference is. I think it seems to me, the least qualified person here to talk about it, like, we weren't really worried about kids' interiority until, like, 2015 maybe, is
Do
how
you
it
say
feels to
kids
me.
inferiority or into
Interiority, having an
that's
interior, like,
is that I'm just now learning this word interiority.
I
yeah.
also don't
Oh,
know it.
maybe I made it up. Like the
Interiority
interior.
complex?
Like,
Adler?
now I have to, well, we're
I'm
gonna
gonna
have
look it
to
up.
take a little podcast break, but that's right, interiority.
Yeah, totally. The quality of being interior or inward.
I'm I'm smarter already from you being a part of this. I think this is producer Andrea helps Marlon.
Just teach you one word.
Please. Yeah.
I'm going to read this definition quick because I think it's helpful. The interiority of a person is their quality of being focused on their own inner nature or musings. Certain things are so personal that they carry their own sense of interiority.
Perfectly executed by Andrea. Perfectly used.
Well, thank you. That's why I picked that one, because it is what I'm talking
she
about.
threw everyone off by saying how unqualified she was, and then like literary genius over here. So yeah, I think you're right. I don't know 2015, and I think it's still cultural, but yeah, West Coast growing up, I had a single mom. She was pretty in touch with her feelings, and I think wanted me to be the same. And I felt pretty good about. In fact, I think it was kind of the opposite. If I was like kind of acting like quiet or mad or something, she would insist, maybe too much, that I tell her what my interiority was at the moment.
Do you feel like, did you feel like you could go to her with tough stuff then?
Yeah, I
That's
did.
what we're trying to,
I still
figure out
do.
how to foster. That's beautiful.
I still do. She's not, I love her and we disagree on some things, but yeah, I still do.
That's great.
Thanks, Marlon. I think that was, helpful for me. So hopefully it helps other people as well. And can't wait to feature some of our listeners' questions on future episodes. Please send your questions our way on Instagram at This Helps Podcast. And we look forward to staying connected with you. Until next time.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope it helped. Stay connected with us at thishelpspodcast.com.